Donald Trump hasn't even been inaugurated yet, and we're already seeing increasing signs of a disturbing trend which may impact the lives of tens of millions of Americans. By my count, 3 prominent Republicans just this morning publicly echoed threats that the Trump administration and the Republican Party would indeed conditionalize federal assistance to blue states once Trump takes power. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we have several clips to talk about in this video, but before we get to the 3 prominent Republicans, I actually want you to see a clip from incoming California Senator Adam Schiff, because he gives some perspective about the typically bipartisan spirit of disaster relief when it comes to Congress and the presidency, regardless of the political affiliation of the states who need the disaster relief. Here's Adam Schiff, then we'll get to the Republicans, and the contrast is staggering.
I'll tell you this, Jonathan. I've been in Congress a long time approving aid after disasters. I never once even considered, is this hurricane hitting a red state or a blue state? What about this flood? What about this fire? It has never mattered to me.
For sure.
We're all in this together. It's the United States of America. We need the incoming president to view it that way. We're ready to work with the president to make sure that we have no gap, no air between us when it comes to making sure that we help victims get back on their feet and help California rebuild.
So that is the sentiment of Democrats, and Democrats have shown it time and time again. President Biden has governed for 4 years. Every time there has been a disaster in a red state, Florida, for example, has suffered multiple disasters, multiple crises, from condo collapses to hurricanes. President Biden has been on the phone, quickly granting emergency relief, toured the disaster sites with Republican officials, not taking political shots, not commenting on how Republicans deny climate change, and maybe if they took climate change more seriously and worked with Democrats to address climate change, the frequency and magnitude of these hurricanes would be meaningfully reduced, blah, blah, blah. Biden could have done that, but he didn't do that. Instead, he set partisanship aside, be it Florida, Kentucky, South Carolina. When disaster strikes, the Democratic president and the Democratic Congress work hand in glove to resolve the issue, and it's been proven time and time again. The Trump-era Republican Party, on the other hand, take a very different approach, and apparently they're going to take the approach that Trump signaled in his first term and run with it to absurd degrees. So here are clips of, again, at least by my count, 3 prominent Republicans, 2 elected officials, 1 a former elected official and top Trump advisor, saying that Trump and the Republican-led Congress will conditionalize federal assistance to blue states in the future. And this is Bill Hagerty, a senator who sits on the Foreign Relations Committee, weighing in on this on Fox News.
We've got to bring accountability to bear here, and before we put funds into place, we've got to find out exactly how we're going to hold these leaders accountable and what sort of policy changes are required.
Well, that's it.
We've got to bring accountability to bear here.
So again, he's saying before you provide funds for disaster relief, there has to be accountability and there has to be a change in policy. Now, again, imagine if the shoe were on the other foot and President Biden said, you know what, these natural disasters that are hitting Florida, we really have to do a forensic federal level investigation to see what Ron DeSantis screwed up, what the Republicans in Florida screwed up, and then maybe we'll dole out federal funds once the people who screwed up are held accountable, and then there are a change from Republican policies to Democratic policies. Imagine. But that's not what Biden did. Here is a former Republican congressman and top Trump advisor, Devin Nunes, who I believe runs Trump Media, the conglomerate behind Truth Social.
What's going to happen? They're going to, just like they've done for the last 20 years, California's going to run to the federal government, and they're going to ask for money. And I think this time, hopefully, I think President Trump and the Republicans in Congress will say, look, we're just not going to keep doing the same thing again. So California's going to need a lot of money, and I feel bad. I have friends that lost homes. Some of the most wealthy real estate in the planet has burnt to a crisp, is burnt to the ground, and it all should be built back. But it has to be built back when California decides that they're actually going to use the water infrastructure that's been built in the state for the last 100 years. They're going to actually use it and allow the water to flow into places like Los Angeles. They're going to bring the timber industry back so you can actually efficiently go and get the logs and the dead trees and everything out of the forest, and so that you can actually, and then also managing that vegetation growth and building in fire breaks. That's what has to happen. Now, what I'm concerned about is Will these people that lost their home, who have consistently voted for people like Gavin Newsom, Jerry Brown, before that, who've given money to these radical green causes, who have embraced the Green New Deal, are they going to sing from the same verse that they've been singing from for 30 years? And are they going to tell the people, oh, this is global warming. There's no issue here. This is all about climate change. If the politicians in California say that again, hopefully the voters in California will say, we're not going to take this nonsense anymore. Let's just let the water flow. Let's let the animals back.
So again, here's the really frustrating. There's so much to unpack there. What Nunes said was so gross on a number of levels. Again, he says hopefully Trump and the Republicans will indeed conditionalize assistance. He's not in a position to directly influence this because he's no longer a member of Congress, but he is urging his former colleagues and Donald Trump to conditionalize federal assistance, number one. Number two, note what he said. He's like, listen, I feel bad for the residents in California. I have friends there. Some of the wealthiest, real estate is burnt to the ground. He cares only, typical MAGA Republican, cares only about the concerns of the rich and not the impoverished, the poor, the working class who also suffered in this wildfire. It's like, oh, my friends were really inconvenienced, rich people. Again, just totally gross, a Freudian slip and a betrayal of his priorities of epic proportion. And then the very end, the implicit threat. I hope that the voters, who typically vote for these politicians, I hope they reconsider as he's discussing conditionalizing federal assistance to this blue state. I mean, you could easily interpret that as an implicit threat. Like, hey, maybe that should be part of the change. Maybe, hey, Californians, if you're concerned about Republican administrations not providing you assistance for disaster relief, well, maybe you should vote for Republicans to run your local and state government, and then you won't have anything to worry about. Then it'll be more likely that the federal assistance flows more freely. I hope you make different choices. Again, imagine Joe Biden or a prominent Democrat or Democratic legislators saying that when natural disasters hit Florida, for example, or South Carolina, or you may recall a few years ago, Ted Cruz caught a lot of flack because Texas's power grid failed, as it has failed multiple times, and he was caught, fleeing to Cancun with his family. Imagine if Democrats had said, Texans, maybe if you want like federal disaster relief, or if you want to guarantee a federal disaster relief, maybe you should vote Greg Abbott, Ted Cruz, and John Cornyn out of office and get some responsible Democrats who actually give a shit about you. Wink, wink. Or if the Democrats had just simply said, Texas's power grid fails an awful lot, seems really fragile. Really, we need these Republicans to make different policy decisions before we give disaster relief to Texas. Imagine the shitstorm that would have ensued from Fox, the Daily Wire, OAN, Newsmax, prominent Republicans, Tim Pool, Joe Rogan, and others. They would be apoplectic, and rightly so, because you shouldn't punish the voters for the mismanagement of the politicians. Now, if you want to make a separate point down the line and say, hey, listen, voters, maybe consider this as you head into the next crisis, I suppose there's room for that. But to tie it so closely to the conversation about federal assistance is really gross and suggests an implicit threat in ways that Democrats simply have never done, politicizing disaster relief in a way that Democrats have never done. Here is another elected Republican echoing the sentiment just this morning. Again, all three of these things occurring this morning, interviews this morning on 3 different networks about how Republicans should work with Trump to conditionalize federal assistance.
Can't happen again, and the policies of the liberal administration out there, I believe, have made these fires worse.
Do you expect, though, that Congress and Republicans will still help these Americans in need, even if they don't like their local politics and the party?
I expect that there will be strings attached to money that is ultimately approved, and it has to do with being ready the next time, because this was a gross failure this time.
So you have Barrasso here not even answering the question. She's like, okay, so let's be clear. You all will provide federal assistance to places even if you disagree with their policies or their politics, if they're run by Democrats. He ducked the question. He would not say, oh, Jesus, no, of course, Margaret, no, of course. I want to be very clear. Of course, there will be federal assistance. We would never play politics with disaster relief like that to our fellow Americans. Instead, he says, I expect there are going to be strings attached. Folks, the reason I'm bringing this up is to show you once again, and I understand, and for the most part, I am preaching to the choir, but perhaps there will be an independent or a centrist who watches this video and really takes account, we should have one standard for all politicians, Democrats and Republicans. Perhaps the standard will shift based on the prominence and power of that particular position. So, for example, the President of the United States should be held to higher standards than a congressman, but they should all, because they wield enormous power on behalf of we the people, they should all be held to the same standard. You shouldn't change the standard based on if it's a Democrat or a Republican. If you do so, you are a hypocrite and you betray the infirmity of your position because you can't grade them on the single standard. If you have to grade them on a curve, what you are tacitly conceding is your side is objectively worse. That's just what you're doing. And so with that in mind, consider this. Imagine, just close your eyes and imagine the shoe on the other foot. The Texas power grid failure, Florida's experience with hurricanes. Let's just set natural disasters aside. What about mass shootings, school shootings? Imagine Democratic politicians, every time there's a mass shooting in a red state saying, hey, you know what? Maybe if you took gun control more seriously, maybe if you cared more about the lives of second graders than you do about the absoluteness of the Second Amendment, maybe if you cared more about kids, maybe, we would be more likely to provide federal assistance. But since you hate your own kids, I don't see why Democrats should foot the bill on this. Imagine Democrats saying that sort of shit. They don't. It is simply a fact that the Democratic Party, for better or worse, is morally superior in terms of their elected officials than elected Republicans. It's just true. Elected Democrats don't say this shit. They don't. They don't even hint at it. And I imagine that's for two reasons. Number one, I imagine it just doesn't occur to them to play these sorts of games with people's lives, even in red states. But number two, even if it did, they know that the media would treat it differently. Probably most people would treat it differently. We have come to expect nothing morally from elected Republicans. They can say and do and threaten the most unhinged shit, and people don't care. The Republicans have so many advantages with respect to funding and the media and, control of government. They're going to have a trifecta on January 20th, a Republican supermajority. Most state legislatures are under the control of Republicans. Most of the media is either openly in favor of Republicans or grades them on a curve. And then you have this shit where they're threatening to play politics with actual policy and fundraising to punish the voters of blue states and bully them into voting for Republicans. And they're so comfortable with it, they are telling you straight up on live TV. And Trump hasn't even been inaugurated yet. So imagine what is to come. Perhaps we should consider that for the next election. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.